This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
Welcome everyone to the X-Cast. The truth is in here. I'm your host, Tony Black, and welcome back to I Want to Believe Minute, where we unpick the second X-Files movie 1 minute at a time. Today, helping me to explore minute 22, which runs for approximately 21 minutes as Father Joe travels with Mulder in the van, through to 21 minutes 59 seconds as the vans arrive outside Agent Bannon's house, is regular X-Cast guest, Russ Hugo. Thanks for joining me again, Russ.
Thank you. Looking forward to this next minute.
Yeah, and it's a continuation of where we were in the previous minute. And we're still in the van, travelling through West Virginia. We've got Mulder, we've got Father Joe, we've got Agents Whitney and Drummy. And the whole minute takes place in that van, which is one of those classic rear projection jobs you get in the movies, Russ, this. So when he talked about how it was light for the time of day, maybe that's a fact that they filmed a lot of exteriors outside of the snow and then back projected it onto all of these actors sitting in a car on a soundstage or whatever, like the good old days of cinema. So they weren't actually driving through the snow at this point.
Which, to give them credit, I didn't notice that until you pointed it out in the notes. There is, of course, later a much more noticeable rear projection. Mulder's on the cliff. But this was really well done. And rewatching it, it's tough to spot. They did a great job.
Yeah, I think they did pretty well with it, actually. I didn't know either. So, fair play to them for that, really. Very different from the old... I mean, you got to love classic movies, but you really could tell. Back in the day, you really could tell. And there's nothing like that here. So, the scene continues with Mulder... Joe's just asked Mulder, who made you the expert? And that's a cue in, really, into Mulder giving a bit of background to himself. Not too much of an exposition about who he was, but to me, Russ, it smacked of giving an audience member who has just come in to watch I Want to Believe, having never watched any of the X-Files in the past, some idea maybe of Mulder being this paranormal investigator, this brilliant maverick who, has this insight. Do you know what I mean?
I do, and I wonder how much of it's fully necessary to do here in this, because when we're introduced to Mulder in the beginning of the film, he's doing newspaper clippings. There's the photo of the sister, but on the other hand, for folks, again, like you're saying, who are coming to this completely fresh, it doesn't hurt to, I think, have some exposition in a film. It is inelegant, it's hard to do. Yeah, it's considering the challenge of what they're trying to do in the short amount of time, it's moderately successful. And here, at least it provides an instance for exhibit to continue the hostility. And so there is some character amongst the exposition. And to defend the scene and the exposition, I want to give Duchovny credit here. I think this is one of the better played scenes in the film, where the fatigue, the casualness that would be the old Mulder is really manifesting here as a fatigue, but in kind of a gentle warmth, still having that compassion as opposed to like a grizzled noir fatigue. So I enjoy that aspect of it, even if the dialogue, what is actually being said, is very dry and exposition. His performance and Exhibit's performance, I think, carry the scene fairly well, carry the minute very well.
I really like that description of Duchovny here, actually. That level of compassionate fatigue. That's great. Yeah, I'd not thought of it like that. And I think you're right, because quite often he used to get stick, didn't he, for if he didn't quite have a script that he loved, he would really sort of phone it in sometimes in the series. And there were episodes where he just looks visibly bored. But I think sometimes we got that wrong in that I think he's always been a bit of an underrated actor, I think, Duchovny. Not just in the X-Files, but generally. And I think he knows how, he's right to play Mulder with that level of jaded fatigue, because that's exactly where he is in this film, especially at the beginning. He's spent a lot of years in his basement office in that remote cabin, just doing his clippings out of magazines, having lost belief, and that's what this film's all about. Is that it's, I want to believe it applies to Mulder as much as anybody else. So I think that's absolutely right, really. I think that's a really good observation. And I think in that regard, the exposition it's necessary, but it's also maybe important as he starts to try and rediscover, he's going to end up shaving off the beard of sadness, but as he starts to rediscover himself, I think that's key. And Frank Spotnitz describes it as the equivalent of the bar scene in Fight the Future, where he's talking to Glenn Headley at the bar, which is, a better scene, a better written scene, and a more iconic scene in many respects, because the dialogue is just a bit sharper in that one, and it's a bit more fun. Whereas in this one, it is a bit more somber and fatigued. But I think you need a scene like this. But definitely, I like the complexion of that. I think that's a great observation.
No, thank you. And I agree with you about the exposition scene and Fight the Future being more successful. The humor, the setting kind of matching the myth arc and the pacing and allowing the characters to work. One of the issues here for me is, and this isn't necessarily a critique of the scene, but it's something I'm not sure about. And that's what's interesting about doing these minutes, is looking at these small beats and wondering, was that intentional? And the one I want to kind of get your take on here is when Father Joe responds to Mulder's description about the sister, the conversation, and he says she's dead. Comparing that to a lot of the other deliveries, and I'll use the words of psychic pronouncements that the character makes, it's very, very stiff. And it feels more like either just a normal conversational comment or cold reading. In other words, is it just a stiff delivery because we're dealing with exposition, or the actor Connolly wasn't that interested, or is it actually they're hinting that this is just a clear observation that he is just continuing the conversation? And I don't know if that makes sense. There is it's unclear to me what the actual authorial and directorial intent of what that interaction between Mulder and Joe is supposed to be in that scene. But I lean more towards the mundane, but I'm curious what your take is on that.
Well, it is a funny one now you say that. I mean, I just assumed that he, whether psychically or not, he intuited that Samantha was dead, and it's a way of, again, feeds into the exposition side of a way of telling us this. We've had the hints, we've had the clues, we've had, I can't remember whether Scully and Mulder actually discuss it in the scene, in the basement. We definitely see Samantha's picture. I don't know if they do. I think it feels like it's designed to sort of spell out that he had a sister who died, because obviously they're very specifically trying to draw the connection, the identification between Agent Bannon and Samantha, which Frank Spotnitz says in the commentary. That was the intent of this moment. Where you get Whitney look back and see Mulder's vulnerability. There's that shot of her looking back at him as this tether between Bannon and Samantha is there. But I think it could also be the direction, though, that it was a bit uncertain. I mean, maybe it was the fact that I very much doubt Billy Connolly has much awareness of the X-Files mythology and what happened before this film. I'd love to know if he'd watched the show. I mean, maybe he caught the odd episode and he knew about it because it was so popular. But I very much doubt he knew much about everything that had happened before. So maybe had this been delivered by somebody who did know that, then it would be it would be a bit more convincing. But it is strange. It is strange now you say it. Do you see where I'm coming from with that? I think it might be more designed as an exposition tool than anything else.
Oh, 100%. No, I think it is definitely an exposition tool. I'm just saying, it's unclear where the line delivery is beyond that, because it is, if it is just simply clunky, or if it's intentional to separate Joe's previous and following statements that are psychic adjacent or explicitly psychic. But yeah, it's tricky. But what I am curious is, if we have a few more minutes in this minute, I'd like to talk in maybe a future minutes with you about Drummy and Whitney, because I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there. Have you talked much in your previous minutes about Connolly and Father Joe? Because I know he was a controversial casting figure back in the day. I remember reading a lot of critiques of his performance, and I'm curious where you land on it now.
We have got into that, yeah.
Okay.
I think the other people who recorded subsequently to me will have got into it as well. But yeah, I said when I talked about it, how bizarre it seemed. You know, especially as a British person who knows Billy Connolly in a very different context than a lot of other audiences. And you know, I know he did well in America, but you know, it was just so strange. It was so strange, and I still find it strange. I still find it strange, Russ. I still can't quite square it in my head all these years later. Really, it's not that he's not good in the role, because I think he is quite good in the role, but he's really odd casting in a way that, you know, I understand why you'd cast Brad Dourif. You know, I understand why you'd cast Tom Noonan. I understand why you'd cast Nick Chinland. You know, all these guys who played these really creepy, malevolent X-Files villains who really made an impact. I don't understand how you think, right, I've got a psychic paedophile priest. I know, Billy Connolly. It really doesn't track in my head. But, you know, that's by the by. Obviously, Chris Carter saw something, and it's a very, very interesting performance, really. I mean, credit for that. I mean, it is completely out of nowhere in that sense. So, you know, for sheer originality, I can't fault it. You know, I never in a million years would have cast Billy Connolly in this role had I been the casting director. But there you go.
My inference, and it could be wrong, is the reason they went with him, perhaps, for the character, as opposed to somebody like Noonan or Dourif, is the intention of this film to maintain, like what I was stating earlier, about that ambiguity that it's really trying to push forward. And the character at its core is so repellent that you're going to go in as Scully does. That's where the viewer is going to start. But if you want to have that doubt and that balance of both redemption, is that possible? You really wrestle with those things with somebody who's so repellent. You have to kind of wrap it in a softer shell. And that might have been some of the intention, to cast somebody who's known for being a little bit more goofy, a little bit more warm and fuzzy, and can bring some of that, I think, the bite that comes back, similar to what Noonan did in Paper Hearts, but not as disturbing. Because Noonan does have that wit and that, you know, snap back to Mulder that Connolly can bring. He has that timing that can jump back with the barbs. And so I wonder if the comedy background is one of the reasons to kind of come in to make it a formidable foe to somebody, dialogue-wise, with Anderson, but then also make him a little bit less repugnant when he's on screen, because we're going to have to spend a lot of time with him. At least aesthetically. The character is still historically vile and all of that.
But you whenever you see an actor on screen where you have preconceptions of or pre-existing knowledge of, you definitely bring that with you.
Sure.
You know, you do, in whatever role.
100%.
So, yeah, you might well be right. That's a great read on it, really. But yeah, it's definitely unique casting for sure. But yeah, we will talk about Drummy and Whitney in a minute. I think in another minute, because I think there's a good conversation to be had there, and obviously Whitney particularly comes into this block a little bit more a bit later. But we'll begin to wrap this up. I think there's a final moment that on the commentary is an interesting one where they both, Carter and Spartans both talk about they've got a few favourite shots in this whole scene, ongoing scene, but one they really like is in the car where Joe leans forwards and then so does Mulder. As the scene's coming to the end and they get into where they're going, it's like a visual two-shot really, where they both sort of lean into frame, and they really like that. I think and I think a lot of it is because it is that whole idea of Mulder and Joe drawing in together, I think, and drawing that connection in this, professional way. So it's an interesting visual decision, I think, there.
It is. I hadn't noticed that again until you commented on that. And that just goes to show I should stop watching these things on streaming where we don't have access to commentaries as easily.
Well, here's an inside baseball. I watch it without the commentary. I make notes, and then I go back and I watch it with the commentary and then make extra notes. And it's very interesting because then you definitely... I won't lie, I wouldn't have picked up on that necessarily first time either. It's only then when you go back and listen. But it is a very good commentary, yeah. Anyway, let's wrap this minute up, and we'll come back very soon, and we'll talk a bit more about some of these other aspects. So, please do join us for the next minute. Until then, always remember, trust no one.